This is the start of my family history attempts. I'm Caleb Davis. I'm going to recount to you some stories and history and lore and perhaps some legends or myths about the Davis family. Um, Wanted to start, I guess, way back at the beginning. So, as far back as I can recall on stuff, even before I was born. Um, My father's mother is named Pauline Grace Krafka. Um, she grew up as part of a very large family. She was one of the older siblings of several siblings. I want to say there was like nine of them or something, but it was a very large family, and she was on the older end. Her mother passed away when she was very young, and as the story is told, at least, um, she took over sort of the mother role in her family and largely raised her younger sisters and brothers. Um, Her father later met another woman and eventually decided to remarry. And at the time that he did that, uh, for whatever reason in the dealings with his new spouse, um, it was decided that he would move on and go and live with his new wife, and he would leave the Davis house to his daughter Pauline to continue raising the children and getting them through school and whatnot. So at that point, essentially, she became a single parent over her younger siblings. Um, Versions of the story that I've heard include things like her having left school early and bec working to support the family as a candy striper, I believe. She raised her siblings and one by one was getting them graduated and moved off and independent on their own. Um, she met a young gentleman friend named Carrol Maynard Davis. He would end up being my father's father. Um, Carrol was from a hardworking family. He was a serious and well minded guy. Um, he had an intense hatred for the name Carroll and the name Maynard, to the point that while he was young, most of his peers called him Davis. Um, when he graduated and was kind of off on his own, making his way in the world, he enlisted into the military, and this was shortly before World War II, um, maybe even during World War II. He enlisted, uh, served in the Marines, and he didn't speak much about his time in military service, but we do know that he was stationed for some period of time as in combat in Japan, and we know that he attained at least the rank of sergeant, and uh, some of his peers ended up just calling him Sarge because he still didn't like the name Carroll or the name Maynard. Um, his signature on anything he owned always said CM Davis, and that's the way he lived his life. While he was serving in the military, uh, he knew that he had Pauline back at home and that he was trying to prepare himself to be able to support a family. While she was working hard and getting her siblings out into the world and basically being a parent for her brothers and sisters, he was overseas fighting in the war. Um, while most of the soldiers kind of enjoyed a certain amount of revelry, and anytime a shore leave was sort of a time of indulgence, there'd be a lot of drinking, a lot of drug use. Um, some seeking of local girls and whatnot. Carroll didn't want to do those things because he had a young lady back at home, and because those things all cost money. And so instead, he operated as a loan shark while he was in the military. He took like the majority of the pay he was making, what he didn't send home to Pauline, he was basically reinvesting throughout his time in the military. The rule was 4 for 5, due on Friday. He would give you $4 and you would have to pay him back five the next Friday, which was when pay came in. So as the other officers would get ready to go to shore leave, they could come to Carroll and he would have several weeks, months even worth of pay all just saved up. And he would lend them money at this 25% interest rate due within a week. So they would borrow to go out and drink and party it up, or find some girls that they could try to impress or whatever. But when they would come back, their next paycheck, they would hand over large amounts of their pay to pay back Carroll the money he had lended them, plus the interest that they owed him. Um, this was an operation that he ran very successfully throughout his time in the war. And when he came home, he had a sock that was just filled with rolled up money, tons of cash that he had put back and saved and saved and saved. The Davis family home technically still belonged to Pauline's father, and Carroll was an old fashioned man, so he went to Pauline's father and he asked for permission to be able to marry her. And he presented a large sock full of money and wanted to buy the Davis home so that he and Pauline would have a place to stay. Um, Pauline's father agreed. He realized that Carroll was a good man and would make a good husband for his daughter. He had one small issue, and that was one of his younger sons named Eugene, but they all called him Dig. Dig had also served in the war. He had come back uh, prior to Carroll and was living now again with Pauline. And Uncle Dig was, he did not handle the war nearly as well as Carroll did. Carroll never really spoke about it. He treated it as things that he had to do. Uh, in one conversation I had with him, I was trying to get him to tell me things about the war because he had given me a World War II book that he wanted me to read, and I read through it and I was very interested. I was asking him for stories, and he didn't really want to share stuff. I asked him if he had ever killed anyone, and he said, I never killed anyone who didn't deserve it. So I have every reason to believe he saw combat. He served as a soldier and did all the things that a soldier's supposed to do, but when he came home from the war, he put all of that behind him and was just a very stern and stoic man. Dig kind of spiraled into a really deep depression. By today's standards, we'd call it like post-traumatic stress disorder. And so he became incredibly, incredibly alcoholic. Uh, Pauline's father was afraid that Dig would have no place to go if he sold the house to Carrol so that Carrol and Pauline could be married and have a place to stay. And he knew that if Carrol and Pauline moved off and got their own place and just left the house with Dig in it, um, Dig was not in a mental place where he could be able to sufficiently support himself. Um, he would drink away any money that he had. He was not responsible enough to be able to tend to his basic needs. He was just very, very depressed and very alcoholic. So he told Carrol that the condition of this marriage and this sale of the home was going to be that they had to also agree to let Dig stay with them so that he always had a place to go. Uh, he didn't want to see one of his sons just turned out on the street. And for whatever reason, in his new marriage, he did not feel he could bring Dig to stay with him. Carrol agreed to this, and Carrol was very much a man of honor. He was a man of his word. He was very serious, and he didn't break promises. So he married Pauline. They took on the house. Uh, they had Dig staying in the spare bedroom, and Carrol got a job working at the local John Deere manufacturing plant. Um, he would do that until he retired. Over the process of time, Carrol and Pauline began to contemplate having children. They were ready to start a family of their own, but they were having an issue with Dig living in the house, in that Dig would go out every night and drink all night. He would come home at horrible hours in the morning, incredibly intoxicated, and kind of rustle and bang through everything as he found his way to his bedroom. And that was his bedroom was actually located through their bedroom, so it became an issue that he's walking right through the room while they're trying to sleep, and it was preventing Carrol from getting adequate rest while he's working in the factory. And this was growing more and more frustrating. And Carrol and Pauline had this discussion several times that they had to do something about Dig because they weren't really in a situation where they could start having children and raising small children with this sort of irresponsible drunkard living in their home. Eventually, Carrol went back to Pauline's father. He apologized. He said he greatly lamented that, like, he didn't want to break his promise, but he didn't see a way that he would be able to continue taking care of Dig the way he had for the past several years, and also be able to start a family with Pauline. And so he was looking towards potentially selling the home, uh, and moving elsewhere so that Dig wouldn't be with them. And since he knew that uh, Henry wouldn't want Dig turned out on the streets, he came to him and he asked him if he wanted to buy the home and continue to take care of Dig himself. It was kind of entertaining. Pauline's father, uh, he was shocked that they still had Dig around. He he did not believe anyone could have tolerated this very difficult, drunk, uh, challenging person being around for that long. And so at that point of surprise, he was like, "Oh, you're still taking care of him? You're a very good man. You've done more than what I expected. I honestly thought it would be a matter of months before you kicked him out. So if you feel the need to get rid of him, um, you can do whatever you feel is appropriate." Um, One of the versions of the story that I heard then had Carol still not wanting to break his promise. Uh, they built a garage in the back of the house, a detached garage, and Dig proceeded to live in the garage. Throughout the entirety of his life, Carol would never have a driver's license. Eventually, Pauline would get a driver's license and they'd have a vehicle. But essentially, he built a garage to be a small home for Dig so that the guy could live out back of the house but not bother them until he moved off on his own and was able to make other arrangements. Um, that's These videos are limited to 15 minutes if I want to upload them on YouTube. So that's all the time I have, but that's kind of the story of the marriage of my father's parents, uh, put down for the records for future posterity. I'll try to continue to make more of these so that we have more of the family stories as time progresses. Thank you.